Wouldn't it be better for society if all the money was digital? It's inconvenient carrying a lot of cash with you everywhere you go. You could get robbed and lose it all. Whereas, if the money is stored on a debit or a credit card, then no one would steal it. Plus, it's a more convenient way of payment. Well, not quite. In a digitized world such as ours, it would be easy to think that living in a cashless society would be much easier than before. But that's not the case. That's not even close to being the case. In fact, some economists believe this could be the worst economic idea. But on the other hand, it's hard to pay with cash when you have to use dimes. Not to mention, you would have to walk with pockets full of dimes everywhere you went. It's hard to track cash. Therefore, it's easier to do illegal things with it. Credit cards have enormous interest rates, so using them is financial suicide. Not to mention the rise of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many others that make cash look like the old grandpa who is still using a record player instead of Spotify. Why don't we all just use credit or debit cards? Wouldn't that solve the whole problem? That would be nice, but we have to realize that there are some downfalls with this plan. First of all, every payment processor relies on smashing that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, they rely on profit to stay in business. Millions and millions of tiny transactions go to MasterCard and Visa every time you swipe your card. The country with the highest payment processing fees is the US. On top of the small 1 to 3% fee that the payment processors, credit card providers, and merchant accounts take on each transaction, they also add a tiny 30-cent fee. This might not seem like much until you see that on a small transaction like a bottle of water or a scone. This will eat up the profits. For example, a 3% transaction fee on a $5 scone is 15 cents. Now add that to another 30 cents and you realize that the business owner just paid 9% of that revenue to the payment processors. If small businesses took these fees themselves, it would eat up their profit margins and they would be out of business. That's why now that $5 scone just became $5.50. Of course, you could point out China and say that their WeChat Pay app offers free transactions. In other words, after you paid for that scone in China, the shop owner would not have to pay 9% of the revenue to the payment provider. How can WeChat Pay do this? Well, it's simple. Only people who use WeChat Pay can send money for free. And that app is owned by Tencent, a privately owned company from China that makes its money by running ads on its Chinese social media apps, similar to Meta. However, the difference here is Meta isn't obliged by law to send customer data to the government. Power to the payment providers is another thing that many people are worried about. In the US in 2019, there were 39.6 billion credit card transactions. Most of that came from Visa and MasterCard, and the other part of it came from American Express and Discover. In China, in 2021 alone, there were over 8.23 trillion yuan, 1.245 trillion USD moving in everyday transactions. At first, it seems harmless, but then you realize that these payment providers are just privately owned companies. As we've stated earlier, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express all rely on fees they charge to their merchants for the majority of their revenue. The merchants later fork over that fee to the consumers because a 2% fee might not sound like that much when you realize that large-scale supermarkets rely on 3% margins, and there are countless other businesses just like that. Unless you're using cash, you're voting every time you swipe your card. Cash is printed up by the government, and that brings with it a whole array of problems. But the government doesn't make money every time you spend the cash. They used your tax dollars to print more dollars, and now you can use them indefinitely, or until they tear apart. But it's not the same with payment providers. They stay in the background, and no one notices them. But that's largely because cash still exists. If cash didn't exist, we would have to rely on credit and debit card providers for everything. This gives them unprecedented power over the population. They can ban any person or organization that they wish. To better illustrate this point, think about the recent bans on popular social media profiles. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram can decide who is allowed on their platform or not. That's normal, right? They're a private company that should get to decide who is allowed on their platform and who gets to be banned. See where we're going with this? What if, in the future, some of these global payment processors decide to ban the FBI from their network? How would the organization get its money? Remember, we wiped out all cash in the beginning. Now we only have digital money. And the only companies that allow digital money are these global payment providers. But what if it gets worse? What if they interfere with government transactions? Now, all of your social security checks are gone. Why? Because MasterCard, Visa, and Amex decided they would no longer support the US government. Cash is the alternative that would save us in a situation like this. It's not the ideal way of doing transactions, but it's good to have options. Free options. All of these payment processors are private companies working for a profit. In the previous scenario, if Visa and MasterCard banned the US government from their platform, the US government would revert to using cash. Problem solved. By denying the US government, Visa did itself more harm than good in this hypothetical scenario. And to build an even stronger case for cash, here are a few of the uses for it in today's day and age. First of all, cash offers you privacy. Remember, even though Western payment processors aren't obliged to sell purchasing data to the government, Tencent is obliged to do so by the Chinese Communist Party. We don't know about you, but we sleep better at night knowing that the government doesn't track the fact that we bought a life-size stormtrooper for our apartment. Some places don't accept cash, as we've already stated. Some of these small businesses don't accept credit cards. They don't have a POS terminal because on small transactions, they eat up most of their profit margins. So having a 20 in your wallet is not as bad as it might seem. Cash also prevents overspending. Many studies have documented that when consumers were given a debit card and sent to the store to buy something, they spent more money than they would have had they been spending cold hard cash. Somehow, when our brains don't see physical money, they think we're not spending it. And it's so much easier to overspend in a situation like that. Sometimes splitting the check or tipping is made much easier when you can use cash instead of a credit card or Venmo. There are some great ways to split a check using your app, but it's still more complicated than using good old green. Have you ever been in a supermarket and the power goes out? Or maybe the Wi-Fi isn't working properly? Well, in that case, you know that you can't pay with your credit card. See, that 20 you kept in your wallet came in handy. Cash makes it easier for you to give to the poor. Most homeless people rely on small donations to survive. Removing cash from our society would put these people in even greater danger. You can't Venmo them the money because they don't have a phone. And even if they did, they wouldn't always be able to get reliable phone service. Finally, using cash is important for the elderly and low-income consumers that rely on cash and checks for their goods and services. How many elderly people do you know that use Venmo? See you in the next video.